The radar screens at Nelly's Air Force Base painted a picture that made no sense. Three unidentified aircraft had materialized over restricted airspace, moving in formation patterns that defied every known flight profile in the books. They weren't showing up on transponders, weren't responding to radio calls, and their flight characteristics suggested technology that shouldn't exist. The duty officer's coffee had gone cold an hour ago, as he stared at the green blips that seemed to dance across his screen with impossible precision. What made the situation even stranger was the timing. This was the third incident in 2 weeks, each one escalating in complexity and duration. The first had lasted 12 minutes before the bogies simply vanished. The second stretched to 27 minutes, with the unknown aircraft performing maneuvers that pulled G-forces no human pilot should survive. Now this third encounter was approaching its 40th minute, and the mystery aircraft showed no signs of leaving. In the underground command bunker, General Marcus Steele gripped his headset with white knuckles. His weathered face, marked by 30 years of military service, reflected the gravity of a situation spiraling beyond protocol. The wall-mounted displays showed not just the three unknowns, but also the scrambled response. Two F-22 Raptors climbing hard through 20,000 feet, their pilots among the most elite in the Air Force. "Sir, the Raptors are approaching intercept altitude," reported Lieutenant Torres from his console. "Phoenix Lead is requesting permission to go weapons hot." Steele's jaw tightened. The rules of engagement were clear, but something about this felt different. These weren't enemy fighters probing defenses or testing response times. The movement patterns suggested something else entirely, almost like they were waiting for something, or someone. "Phoenix Lead, this is Nelly's control," the controller's voice crackled through the speakers. "Maintain defensive posture. Do not engage unless fired upon." But even as those words echoed through the bunker, everyone present knew they were flying blind into a situation that had no precedent, no manual, no clear path forward. The three unknown aircraft continued their mysterious dance in the sky, seemingly oblivious to the two most advanced fighters in the world now racing toward them at Mach 1.8. What none of them could have predicted was that the answer to this puzzle wasn't hidden in some classified Pentagon file or enemy intelligence report. The answer was sitting in a small apartment 15 miles away, watching the same radar feeds on a laptop screen, her calloused fingers hovering over a keyboard as she debated whether to make the call that would change everything. Major Zara Ghost Volkov had been out of the cockpit for 8 months, but she recognized those flight patterns better than her own heartbeat, because she had helped design them, back when the world was different and secrets were smaller, and the line between ally and enemy wasn't drawn in blood across foreign skis. The three aircraft weren't unknown at all. They were ghosts from a program that officially never existed, flown by pilots who were supposed to be dead. Phoenix Lead pushed his F-22 through a climbing turn, the G-forces pressing him deep into his seat as he acquired the first target on his radar. Major Derek "Hammer" Patterson had logged over 2,000 flight hours in various fighters, but nothing had prepared him for the eerie silence coming from the unknown aircraft. They weren't jamming communications. They simply weren't responding, as if they existed in a different realm entirely. "Phoenix 2, you picking up anything on passive sensors?" Patterson's voice cut through the static. His wingman, Captain Riley Stryker Morrison, checked his displays twice before responding. "Negative on electronic emissions. Whatever they're running, it's stone cold. No radar, no comms, no IFF. It's like they're flying by sight alone." That impossibility hung in the air between them. Modern fighters were sensor platforms first, weapons second. The idea that anyone could maintain formation flight at those speeds and altitudes without constant electronic communication and navigation updates defied everything both pilots knew about aerial combat. Below them, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, a brown canvas punctuated by the geometric scars of military test ranges. But Patterson's attention was locked on his heads-up display, where three amber diamonds represented the most sophisticated aerial mystery the United States had encountered since the height of the Cold War. "Phoenix Lead, you are cleared to close to visual identification range," came the command from Nellie's control. "Maintain safe separation and attempt radio contact on guard frequency." Patterson acknowledged and pushed his throttles forward. The Pratt & Whitney engines responded instantly, their twin exhausts painting blue flame against the afternoon sky. The F-22's stealth profile and advanced avionics made it the perfect interceptor for this mission. But as he closed the distance to the unknown aircraft, Patterson couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap laid by someone who understood American capabilities better than they should. The first visual contact came at 3 miles. Through his helmet-mounted display, Patterson could make out sleek silhouettes that seemed to shift and blur in the desert heat shimmer. The aircraft were painted in a matte gray that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and their wing configuration was unlike anything in his recognition training. "Control, Phoenix Lead has visual on 3 aircraft, unknown type. They appear to be maintaining precise formation at Angels 25. What Patterson couldn't see from his angle was the subtle hand signal being passed between the pilots of the unknown aircraft. A quick gesture that had once meant friendly contact. Proceed with caution, in a language of aerial communication that existed only in the memories of a very few. Zara Volkov saw that signal through her laptop's encrypted feed and felt her breath catch. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it down again. Some secrets were supposed to stay buried. Some ghosts were meant to remain dead. But as she watched the F-22s maneuvering into intercept position, she realized that her past was about to collide with the present in ways that could reshape the future of aerial warfare. The apartment around her was sparse, almost monastic in its simplicity. A military-issue desk, a single chair, walls bare except for a photograph of her old squadron, 12 pilots who had sworn an oath that transcended national boundaries. Now only 3 of them were still flying, and they were about to be classified as enemy combatants by the country that had trained them. Her fingers found the phone again. In the cockpit of his F-22, Patterson was running through identification protocols when something caught his eye. The lead aircraft in the unknown formation had just performed a subtle maneuver, a slight roll followed by a brief afterburner pulse that triggered a memory from his advanced tactics training. It was almost like a recognition signal, but from a classification level so far above his clearance that he'd only seen it referenced in footnotes. "Phoenix 2, did you catch that afterburn pattern from the lead bird?" Morrison had seen it too, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Roger. Looked almost like a comm signal, but that's impossible. No one uses afterburner patterns for communication." But someone did. Someone had. And the man who had developed that particular signal was now sitting in a rented office space in Carson City, watching the same engagement unfold on multiple screens while calculating the precise moment when he would need to break cover and prevent what was about to become an international incident, with consequences none of the players could imagine. Colonel Alex Phantom Petrov had been officially dead for 2 years, killed in a training accident that had been classified at levels requiring presidential authorization to access. In reality, he had been recruited into a program so black that it existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and plausible deniability. The 3 aircraft his former students were now flying represented the culmination of that program, and its ultimate failure. The secure phone on his desk buzzed once. He knew who it was before he answered. "Ghost." "Phantom." Zara's voice carried 8 months of isolation and uncertainty. "They're about to shoot down our own people." "I know. The recognition signals aren't working. The new pilots don't know the old codes." Petrov watched his screen as the F-22s maneuvered into attack position. In less than 3 minutes, those pilots would be authorized to engage, and the test program that had cost $12 billion and 17 lives would end in a friendly fire incident that could never be acknowledged or explained. "Are you going to call it in?" Zara asked. "Are you?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Calling it in meant exposure, investigation, and the end of careers that had been carefully reconstructed in the shadows. But not calling it in meant watching 3 of their former students die for maintaining operational security that no longer served any purpose. Phoenix Lead had switched to his targeting system. The unknown aircraft were now close enough for weapons lock, and his orders were clear. If they continued to ignore radio challenges and failed to identify themselves within the next 60 seconds, he was authorized to treat them as hostile. Unknown aircraft on bearing 270, this is United States Air Force. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately or you will be engaged. The response was silence that felt heavier than the desert air. In her apartment, Zara made the decision that had been building for 8 months. She dialed a number that connected directly to the Nelly's command bunker, a number that should have been disconnected when she was reassigned to inactive duty. The fact that it still worked told her everything she needed to know about how closely her former commanders had been watching this situation develop. General Steele's office. "This is Major Volkov. I need to speak with the general immediately. Priority authentication code Whiskey 77 Delta." The pause on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for the duty officer to verify the code against a very short list of names that carried authority beyond rank or current assignment status. "Stand by for General Steele." Patterson's targeting system was painting all 3 aircraft now. His finger rested on the trigger, training and instinct warring with an inexplicable hesitation. Something about this felt wrong, not in a tactical sense, but in a deeper way that connected to classified briefings he'd received about experimental programs and pilots who had disappeared into assignments that didn't officially exist. "Phoenix Lead, you are authorized to engage if targets continue to ignore challenges." The words came through his headset like a countdown to consequences that would ripple far beyond the Nevada desert. But before he could respond, a new voice cut through the radio chatter, a woman's voice with the kind of calm authority that only came from experience in situations where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. All stations, this is Ghost 7. I authenticate Whiskey 77 Delta. Phoenix Lead, stand down immediately. I repeat, stand down immediately." Patterson's finger froze on the trigger. Ghost 7 wasn't a call sign in any database he knew, but the authentication code she'd used was from the highest classification levels, the kind that meant someone with stars on their collar was about to have a very bad day if orders weren't followed exactly. "Control, Phoenix Lead. Can you verify that authentication?" In the bunker, General Steele was already reaching for his secure phone, his face pale with the recognition of what was about to unfold. Zara Volkov's voice on the radio meant that Operation Nightfall, a program he'd hoped never to hear mentioned again, was about to become very public in very dangerous ways. The 3 unknown aircraft had stopped their evasive maneuvers and were now flying straight and level, as if waiting for something. Their formation was still perfect, still impossibly precise, but there was something different in their flight pattern now. Something that suggested they were no longer operating under purely defensive protocols. "Ghost 7, this is Nelly's control. State your current position and authority for this authentication." Zara's response came without hesitation. "I'm the pilot who trained them." Those 6 words changed everything. In the cockpit of his F-22, Patterson felt the weight of implication settle over him like a lead blanket. The unknown aircraft weren't enemy combatants or foreign reconnaissance flights. They were American pilots flying American aircraft in a program so classified that even the people tasked with shooting them down hadn't been told they existed. Control, Phoenix lead requesting immediate clarification of engagement authority. But before Nellie's control could respond, one of the unknown aircraft broke formation and began a gentle turn toward the F-22s. Its movement was deliberate, non-threatening, but unmistakably a communication attempt. As it rolled level on a parallel course, Patterson could see details that made his blood run cold. The aircraft's design was clearly derived from American stealth technology, but refined and improved in ways that suggested years of development beyond anything currently operational. More disturbing was the pilot visible through the canopy, a figure in a flight suit that looked standard-issue American military, complete with what appeared to be Air Force insignia. Control, Phoenix lead. I'm looking at what appears to be U.S. military personnel flying aircraft of unknown configuration, requesting immediate guidance from higher authority. General Steele's voice came through the radio with the weight of 30 years of command decisions. Phoenix lead, you are ordered to escort the unknown aircraft to Nellie's for landing. Any hostile action will be met with immediate response, but you are not, repeat not, authorized to fire first. The escort mission that followed was unlike anything in Patterson's experience. The three unknown aircraft complied with every direction, their pilots demonstrating skill levels that bordered on the supernatural. They maintained perfect formation even while executing complex approach procedures, and their aircraft's performance characteristics suggested propulsion and control systems that were generations ahead of anything in the current inventory. But what struck Patterson most was the professionalism of their flying. These weren't enemy pilots struggling with unfamiliar equipment or foreign pilots trying to reverse engineer American technology. These were aviators trained to the same standards he'd been trained to, flying with the kind of precision that only came from thousands of hours in the cockpit and instruction from the best fighter weapons schools in the world. As the formation descended toward Nellie's, Zara was already driving across the desert at speeds that would have attracted police attention if any law enforcement agency had jurisdiction over what was about to happen. Her military ID would get her onto the base, and her authentication codes would get her into the debrief that was going to rewrite the official history of several classified programs. The three aircraft touched down in perfect sequence, their landing gear extending with hydraulic precision that spoke to maintenance standards equivalent to frontline Air Force units. As they taxied to a secure area of the flight line, ground crews scrambled to establish security perimeters around aircraft that weren't supposed to exist, flown by pilots who were supposed to be dead. The first pilot to emerge from his cockpit was Captain Jamie Echo Rodriguez, formerly of the 65th Aggressor Squadron, officially killed in a training accident 14 months earlier. His emergence into the desert sunlight was like watching a ghost take physical form, and the ground crews who recognized him stepped back in shock. The second pilot was Lieutenant Colonel Maria Viper Santos, whose funeral Zara had attended 18 months ago. Her movements as she completed her post-flight checklist were smooth and professional, betraying none of the emotional weight of returning from the dead. The third pilot remained in his cockpit longer, running through shutdown procedures with the methodical care of someone who had learned that attention to detail was the difference between successful mission completion and catastrophic failure. When Captain Thomas Reaper Chen finally emerged, his first action was to look directly at the building where he knew Zara was waiting. The reunion that followed was conducted in a secure briefing room with no windows and signal-shielding walls that isolated them from any external surveillance. General Steele presided over a meeting that couldn't be recorded, couldn't be transcribed, and officially couldn't have happened because half the participants were supposed to be dead. Operation Nightfall was terminated 8 months ago, Steele began, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that had cost careers and lives. All personnel were reassigned to other duties or declared casualties of training accidents. The aircraft were supposed to have been destroyed. Zara met his gaze without flinching. The aircraft were never destroyed, General, and the pilots were never reassigned. They were transferred to a program that doesn't exist, reporting to commanders who don't officially have authority, flying missions that don't appear in any operational logs. The implications of her words settled over the room like toxic fallout. If Operation Nightfall had continued without official authorization, it meant that a classified program had gone rogue, operating with resources and personnel that belonged to the United States military, but weren't under United States military control. "Who's been running the program?" Steele asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "The same people who designed it," Rodriguez said. "The same people who recruited us and trained us and told us we were serving our country in ways that required the ultimate sacrifice of our identities." The next phase of the debrief revealed the scope of what had been happening in the shadows. The three pilots had been flying reconnaissance missions over foreign territory, gathering intelligence on advanced weapons systems and military installations that were beyond the reach of satellites or conventional aircraft. Their stealth technology was so advanced that they could penetrate airspace that had been considered impermeable to American surveillance. But they had also been conducting missions that crossed legal and ethical lines. Assassination flights that eliminated enemy commanders without official authorization. Sabotage operations that destroyed military assets belonging to nations the United States wasn't officially at war with. Intelligence gathering that violated international treaties signed by presidents who hadn't known about the program's existence. "We started questioning our orders 3 months ago," Santos explained. "The mission profiles were becoming more aggressive, more politically sensitive. We were being asked to do things that felt more like mercenary work than military operations." Zara understood the weight of what they'd been through. Operation Nightfall had been designed to create the ultimate stealth fighters, not just aircraft that could avoid radar detection, but pilots who could operate completely outside official channels. The psychological conditioning required to function in that environment changed people in ways that couldn't be easily reversed. "Why did you come back now?" General Steele asked. "Why risk exposure by flying over domestic airspace?" Chen spoke for the first time since entering the briefing room. "Because we found out what the next phase of our missions was going to be." The silence that followed was pregnant with implications that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Outside classified programs, military personnel weren't asked to conduct operations against their own country's interests. But inside programs that existed in legal gray areas, the definition of national interest could be interpreted by individuals who weren't accountable to traditional command structures. "Domestic targets," Zara said, the words falling like stones into still water. "They were being tasked with domestic targets." General Steele's expression hardened into something that belonged on a battlefield rather than in a briefing room. The transformation from classified program to potential treason had happened gradually, incrementally, in ways that made it difficult to identify the exact moment when serving one's country had become betraying it. The investigation that followed Operation Nightfall's exposure consumed 3 months and ended careers that had spanned decades. Congressional hearings were held in closed sessions that required security clearances most legislators didn't possess. Military budgets were restructured to eliminate funding streams that couldn't be traced or accounted for through traditional oversight mechanisms. But the most significant consequence was the quiet reinstatement of 3 pilots who had been officially dead for more than a year. Rodriguez, Santos, and Chen were given new identities, new assignments, and enough psychological support to transition back into military service that operated within legal boundaries and official command structures. Zara was offered a return to active duty, but she declined. 8 months of isolation had taught her that some kinds of service required different kinds of sacrifice, and her skills were better suited to training the next generation of pilots than to flying missions that pushed the boundaries of what military personnel should be asked to do. The 3 aircraft that had precipitated the crisis were eventually transferred to a legitimate test program, their advanced stealth and propulsion systems studied by engineers who worked for defense contractors with proper oversight and public accountability. The technological advances they represented would eventually make their way into next-generation fighters that would serve the country openly rather than in shadows. Colonel Petrov was never found. His office in Carson City was cleared out within hours of the Nellies incident, leaving behind only generic furniture and a computer hard drive that had been wiped with military-grade security protocols. Intelligence analysts suspected he had been extracted by the same shadowy network that had been running the unauthorized continuation of Operation Nightfall, but no evidence was ever found to support official investigation. The Afterburn signal that had started the entire crisis became part of a new training protocol for Air Force pilots. The subtle communication method developed in classified programs was now taught openly in survival schools and advanced tactics courses. What had once been a secret language shared by dead pilots was now part of the standardized curriculum for living ones. Major Derek Patterson received a commendation for his handling of the interception mission, though the citation was classified at levels that ensured it would never appear in his official record. His restraint in not firing on the unknown aircraft had prevented an incident that could have ended 3 lives and exposed a classified program in ways that would have damaged national security for decades. The recognition signal that had saved those lives, a brief flicker of afterburner flame that had conveyed friendly contact, proceed with caution, became legendary among pilots who flew missions in contested airspace. It was a reminder that sometimes the difference between shooting down an enemy and protecting an ally was measured in the space between heartbeats and the wisdom to recognize the difference. Years later, when aviation historians attempted to piece together the complete story of what had happened in Nevada airspace that day, they found official records that had been sanitized to the point of meaninglessness. The 3 aircraft were described as experimental platforms, the pilots as test personnel, and the entire incident as a training exercise involving advanced communication protocols. But among the pilots who had been there, who had lived through the tension of that afternoon when split-second decisions could have changed history, the story was preserved in its entirety. They understood that military service sometimes required choices that couldn't be explained in official reports or justified in public hearings. The legacy of that day lived on in training programs that taught recognition signals to pilots who might never need them, in safety protocols that assumed friendly aircraft might not be able to identify themselves through normal channels, and in the quiet confidence that came from knowing that some of the people protecting American airspace had learned their skills in schools that officially didn't exist. Zara eventually returned to flying, but not in military service. She became a test pilot for a private defense contractor, her skills with experimental aircraft making her invaluable in programs that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aviation technology. Her call sign, Ghost, became known throughout the test pilot community as someone who could coax performance out of aircraft that other pilots couldn't even control. The apartment where she had made the decision to break operational security and prevent a friendly fire incident was eventually abandoned, but not before she retrieved the single photograph from its bare walls. The image of 12 pilots who had sworn an oath that transcended national boundaries remained on her desk wherever she worked, a reminder that some bonds forged in the crucible of service couldn't be broken by death, disappearance, or official denial. Rodriguez, Santos, and Chen returned to operational flying with new identities and carefully constructed histories that explained their absence from military service. They flew together whenever possible, their formation skills honed by months of operating without ground control or electronic assistance. Their understanding of each other's flying styles had been refined to the point where they could communicate through aircraft positioning and engine management in ways that seemed almost telepathic to observers. The F-22s that had been seconds away from engaging them that day continued to patrol the skies over Nevada, their pilots now trained to recognize the subtle signals that could prevent misunderstandings between friendly forces operating under different levels of classification. The technology that made such confusion possible, stealth systems, so advanced that they could hide American aircraft from American radar, continued to evolve in programs that balanced secrecy with accountability. General Steele retired from active duty 6 months after the Nellis incident, his final efficiency report noting his exceptional handling of a classified situation that required balancing operational security with personnel safety. He never spoke publicly about the decisions he'd made that day, but his influence on policies governing oversight of classified aviation programs ensured that future operations would have safeguards against the kind of mission creep that had characterized Operation Nightfall. The Nevada desert, where the crisis had unfolded, remained a testing ground for advanced military technology, its vast expanses and restricted airspace providing cover for development programs that pushed the boundaries of aviation science. But the lessons learned from that afternoon, when ghosts had materialized in broad daylight, influenced how those programs were structured, supervised, and held accountable to the democratic institutions they were designed to serve. The signal itself, that brief flicker of afterburner flame that had communicated volumes in a language known by only a few, became part of aviation lore that was passed down through generations of military pilots. It represented the importance of understanding that warfare in the modern era required not just technical skill and tactical knowledge, but also the wisdom to recognize when apparent enemies might actually be allies operating under constraints that couldn't be immediately understood. In the end, the crisis that began with 3 unidentified aircraft in Nevada airspace became a case study in how military personnel should handle situations that existed in the gray areas between official policy and operational reality. The pilots involved demonstrated that training, discipline, and professional judgment could navigate even the most complex scenarios when guided by principles that prioritized human life and national security in equal measure. The story of that day was never officially acknowledged, never publicly celebrated, and never fully documented in records that future historians could access. But it became part of the institutional memory of the Air Force, a reminder that the most important victories were sometimes the ones that prevented conflicts rather than winning them. And in the quiet moments between training flights and mission briefings, pilots who had earned their wings in programs that pushed the boundaries of human and machine capability would sometimes share stories about the afternoon when recognition of a simple signal prevented a tragedy that would have echoed through military aviation for decades. The sky over Nevada had witnessed the convergence of advanced technology, human skill, and the kind of split-second decision-making that defined military aviation at its highest levels. The outcome of that convergence, 3 lives preserved, a classified program exposed but contained, and lessons learned that would influence future operations, represented military professionalism at its finest. Major Zara Ghost Volkov's decision to break operational security and prevent a friendly fire incident became a model for how personnel should balance classified obligations with moral imperatives. Her understanding that some secrets were worth preserving and others were worth exposing demonstrated the kind of judgment that separated exceptional military leaders from merely competent ones. The 3 pilots she had trained, Rodriguez, Santos, and Chen, continued their careers with the knowledge that their skills had been tested not just in combat situations, but in scenarios that required them to question orders while maintaining discipline. Their experience in programs that existed outside normal military structures gave them perspectives on service and sacrifice that informed their leadership styles throughout their careers. The afterburn signal that had started as a classified communication method developed for stealth operations became a symbol of how military personnel could maintain connection and recognition even when official channels failed. Its adoption into standard training curricula ensured that future generations of pilots would have the tools necessary to prevent similar misunderstandings. The F-22 Raptor pilots who had been seconds away from engaging unknown aircraft that turned out to be friendly forces learned lessons about restraint and verification that influenced their approaches to air-to-air combat throughout their careers. Their experience with the incident became part of advanced tactics instruction at weapons schools across the Air Force. The classified programs that had enabled the entire situation were restructured with oversight mechanisms that balanced operational security with accountability to democratic institutions. The technological advances developed in those programs continued to enhance American military capabilities, but within frameworks that ensured they served national interests rather than institutional ones. The Nevada desert continued to host experimental flights that pushed the boundaries of aviation technology, but the legacy of that day when 3 ghosts had materialized in broad daylight influenced how those flights were planned, executed, and integrated with existing air defense systems. Safety protocols developed from the incident became standard practice for test operations involving advanced stealth technology. Years passed, and the pilots who had lived through the crisis found themselves in positions of increased responsibility within the Air Force hierarchy. Their experiences with classified programs and emergency decision-making made them valuable advisors on policies that balance secrecy with safety, operational capability with legal compliance. The story they carried with them, of recognition signals that prevented tragedy, of split-second decisions that preserved lives, and of professional judgment that navigated impossible situations, became part of the institutional wisdom that guided military aviation into an era where the line between experimental and operational, between classified and public, became increasingly complex. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that afternoon in Nevada airspace was the demonstration that military professionalism, when guided by principles that prioritized human life and national service above institutional self-preservation, could solve problems that seemed impossible and prevent conflicts that could have had consequences extending far beyond the immediate participants. The 3 aircraft that had precipitated the crisis eventually found their way into museums, their advanced stealth and propulsion systems displayed as examples of American technological innovation in military aviation. The plaques describing their capabilities mentioned their role in advancing fighter aircraft design, but made no reference to the classified programs where they had been tested or the day when they had nearly been shot down by their own military. Major Zara Ghost Volkov's contribution to preventing that tragedy was never officially acknowledged in public forums, but her influence on training programs and safety protocols ensured that her understanding of aerial combat and recognition signals would continue to protect military personnel for decades to come. And on clear afternoons when the desert sky stretched endlessly over Nevada's military testing ranges, pilots flying the latest generation of stealth fighters would sometimes practice the afterburn signal that had once saved 3 lives, a brief flicker of flame that communicated volumes about the bonds between aviators who served in the shadows of classified programs, and the wisdom to recognize friendship even when it wore the mask of mystery. The legacy of that day lived on in every pilot who learned that sometimes the most important skill in aerial combat was knowing when not to pull the trigger, and that the most valuable intelligence was often the wisdom to recognize that apparent enemies might actually be allies operating under constraints that couldn't be immediately understood or officially acknowledged. In the end, the story of the F-22s that entered lock-on until one pilot noticed her afterburn flick meant ceasefire became a testament to the power of human judgment, professional restraint, and the recognition signals that connected military aviators across boundaries of classification, time, and the official denials that surrounded programs designed to keep democracy safe by operating in its shadows.